The story of the Blackwood orchards and the vanished harvesters of Porthaven, Oregon, 1888. In the windswept expanse of Porthaven, Oregon, a chilling tale lies buried beneath the fertile soil of the Blackwood orchards. Established in 1888, the orchards brought unprecedented prosperity to the isolated coastal town, their bounty fueling the rise of the influential Blackwood family. Yet, this success was built upon a sinister foundation, a truth that local lore whispers but official records vehemently deny. Between 1888 and 1892, 112 seasonal workers vanished from the orchard's employment. Not a single resignation, no reported deaths, no forwarding addresses, just names meticulously erased from ledgers, as if they were never more than phantoms. The disturbing correlation: each disappearance coincided with record-breaking harvests and inexplicable surges in the Blackwood family's already immense wealth. The family's private journals, unearthed during a 1972 renovation, hint at a secret far darker than mere exploitation. What truly transpired during those 5 years, when the fruit was sweet, but human life was brutally cheap? Before we delve into the haunting story of the Blackwood orchards and its lost harvesters, ensure you've subscribed to our channel and activated that notification bell. We're unearthing America's most unsettling historical enigmas, and we want you to be part of every grim revelation. Also, share your state in the comments below. We love connecting with fellow seekers of forgotten truths across the nation. The chilling fate of those 112 souls begins in the spring of 1887, when a visionary, if ruthless, entrepreneur named Silas Blackwood arrived in Porthaven. Porthaven, Oregon, in 1887, was a small, struggling fishing village on the rugged Pacific coast. Its isolation, beautiful though it was, had long hampered economic growth. The local economy was precarious, reliant on unpredictable fishing hauls and limited timber production. Into this desperate landscape came Silas Blackwood, a 35-year-old magnate from New York, whose reputation preceded him as a man who turned desolate land into gold. Unlike other lumber barons and shipping magnates, Blackwood possessed a unique vision: vast orchards of apples and pears, thriving in the coastal climate. He carried letters of recommendation from influential figures in Portland, all praising his Midas touch and his ability to cultivate prosperity from barren ground. Blackwood was a man of imposing stature, with piercing blue eyes and a shock of black hair that matched his surname. Those who met him described a man of quiet intensity, his words measured, his presence commanding. He dressed impeccably, even in the dusty logging camps and muddy fishing docks, favoring tailored tweed suits and polished leather boots that bespoke wealth and unwavering self-assurance. The land he acquired, a sprawling parcel bordering the rugged coastline and the dense coastal forests, was deemed unsuited for anything but grazing. Yet, Blackwood saw its potential, fueled by the consistent coastal rainfall and surprisingly mild winters. The orchards he established became a marvel. Rows upon rows of fruit trees, meticulously cultivated, rose like verdant armies from the Oregon soil. Blackwood spared no expense, importing saplings from the finest nurseries in California and Europe, and hiring horticultural experts from established orchards in the East. What set the Blackwood orchards apart, however, was its workforce. While other coastal industries struggled to find reliable labor, Blackwood seemed to have an endless supply. His orchards operated at full capacity throughout 1888, yielding harvests that dwarfed those of any competitor, generating profits that were whispered to be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, an astronomical sum for a rural Oregon enterprise. Blackwood attributed his success to his progressive employment policies. He claimed to offer higher wages than local fisheries, provided spacious on-site bunkhouses, and fostered a community spirit where employees were treated with dignity. Local newspapers lauded him as the pioneer who brought modern agriculture to Oregon's wild coast, a testament to what northern ingenuity and southern Oregon's untapped resources could achieve. Yet, those with a keener eye noticed troubling inconsistencies. Workers seemed to arrive and depart with alarming frequency. Families would appear, toil in the orchards for a few months, and then simply vanish. When pressed, Blackwood explained that many of his employees were transient workers, drawn by the promise of good wages, but naturally inclined to move on with the seasons, seeking new opportunities along the burgeoning West Coast. This explanation satisfied most Porthaven residents, who were preoccupied with their own struggles against the elements and the unforgiving nature of coastal life. The orchards, after all, brought desperately needed employment and capital to the struggling town. Questioning Blackwood's methods seemed ungrateful, even unwise. Yet, there were those who observed details that didn't quite align. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Porthaven's only physician, confided in her husband that she had never been called to treat a single worker from the Blackwood orchards, despite the inherent dangers of agricultural machinery and the strenuous nature of harvesting. Elias Thorne, the taciturn general store owner, noted that orchard workers rarely purchased personal items, and their transience seemed to preclude them from sending or receiving mail, unusual for people supposedly maintaining connections in a rapidly expanding nation. Most troubling were the observations of 10-year-old Lily Pritchard, whose family farm bordered the vast Blackwood property. Lily spent her days exploring the nearby tide pools and sketching the abundant coastal wildlife, activities that gave her an unobstructed view of the orchard's operations. She noticed that while many workers entered the orchards each morning, far fewer faces seemed to leave at the end of the day. When she mentioned this to her father, he dismissed it, suggesting workers likely used different exits or worked varying shifts. But Lily's sharp young eyes had caught something else entirely. On several occasions, usually during the darkest hours before dawn, she had seen heavily loaded wagons, draped in canvas tarps, departing from the orchard grounds. These wagons always headed inland, along a seldom-used logging trail that wound deep into the coastal forest, and they always returned empty by sunrise. The child's innocent observations would prove more significant than anyone could have imagined. For in the autumn of 1888, as Blackwood's orchards reached peak production, and his profits soared to unprecedented heights, the first chilling signs appeared that something far more sinister than fruit harvesting was taking place within those verdant rows. The first crack in Silas Blackwood's meticulously crafted façade appeared on November 11, 1888, when an unseasonal blizzard swept through Porthaven with unexpected ferocity. Snow fell for 2 days straight, blanketing the coast in a pristine, yet isolating white. Roads became impassable, telegraph lines snapped, and even the hardiest residents were forced to seek shelter until the storm abated. For Lily Pritchard, confined to her family's small farmhouse with nothing but her sketchbook and the panoramic view from her bedroom window, the storm provided an unexpected opportunity to observe the orchard's operations under extraordinary circumstances. What she witnessed during those 2 days would forever haunt her dreams. On the first day of the storm, as the wind howled across the frozen landscape and snow piled against the orchard fences, Lily noticed that lights remained burning throughout the night in one of the larger bunkhouses. This struck her as odd, since most operations had ceased until the weather improved. Through her father's old spyglass, borrowed without permission, she could discern figures moving back and forth past the illuminated windows, suggesting work continued despite the treacherous conditions. More puzzling was the absence of smoke from the chimneys of other bunkhouses. The cluster of neat wooden structures, normally bustling with life, showed no signs of heating fires or chimney smoke. Even in the harshest weather, families would be burning whatever fuel they could find to stay warm. The buildings appeared eerily lifeless, as if no one lived there at all. On the second night, as the storm reached its peak intensity, Lily witnessed something that made her blood run cold. Around midnight, during a brief lull in the wind, she saw a line of people being led from the brightly lit bunkhouse toward what appeared to be a newly constructed, windowless shed at the rear of the property. Even through the swirling snow, she could see that the figures moved slowly, almost reluctantly, and seemed to be carrying small bundles or personal belongings. What disturbed her most was the presence of armed men, their rifles clearly visible even at a distance, escorting the group. Lily counted at least 6 guards. This was no ordinary transfer of workers to different quarters. The entire procession had the chilling feel of prisoners being moved under duress. The girl watched until the group disappeared into the shed. No one emerged. The guards returned to the main bunkhouse, but the shed remained dark and silent for the rest of the night. Lily waited until dawn, expecting to see the workers return to their duties, but the building remained empty and still. On the third day, as the storm finally began to subside, Lily observed the most disturbing scene yet. 3 wagons, heavily loaded and covered with canvas tarps, departed from the orchard grounds just before sunrise. Despite the treacherous road conditions, the drivers seemed grimly determined to reach their destination, whatever the risk. The wagons headed inland through the snow-covered fields, following the same seldom-used logging trail that led deep into the coastal forest. When the wagons returned several hours later, they were empty, their canvas tarps neatly folded, as if they had never carried anything at all. That afternoon, As roads became passable and normal activity resumed throughout the county, Lily made a discovery that confirmed her worst fears. Sneaking onto the orchard property while workers were busy clearing snow, she approached the windowless shed where she had seen the group of people disappear 2 nights earlier. The building was empty. Completely empty, not just of people, but of any sign that people had ever been there. No personal belongings, no bedding, no evidence of recent habitation. The floor had been swept clean, and the air smelled faintly of lye soap, as if someone had scrubbed away all traces of human presence. But in one corner, partially hidden beneath a loose floorboard, Lily found something that made her heart pound. A small wooden doll, crudely carved, the kind a child might cherish. The wood was smooth from handling, the painted eyes still bright. Inside the doll, almost imperceptibly carved into its base, were the initials AM and a date. November 9th, 1888, 2 days before the blizzard, 2 days before the mysterious nighttime procession to the shed. Lily clutched the doll to her chest and ran home through the melting snow, her mind reeling with terrible possibilities. She burst into her family's kitchen, where her parents were preparing dinner, breathless and pale with fear. "Papa," she gasped, "something awful happened at the orchards during the storm. There were people and guards and wagons." Her father, Thomas Pritchard, looked up from his evening newspaper with mild irritation. "Lily, how many times have I told you to stay away from that property? Mr. Blackwood's business is none of our concern." "But Papa, I found this." Lily held up the small doll, her hand trembling. "There was a child, and now they're gone, and I think—" Thomas Pritchard's expression changed as he examined the doll. The implications were too disturbing to ignore. A child's doll found in an empty building after a suspicious nighttime, gathering suggested possibilities that no father wanted to contemplate. "Where exactly did you find this, daughter?" Lily explained everything she had witnessed during the 2-day storm, her words tumbling over each other in her eagerness to be believed. Her mother, Martha Pritchard, grew increasingly pale as the story unfolded. When Lily finished, the kitchen fell silent, save for the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Thomas Pritchard turned the small doll over in his calloused hands, studying the carved initials and date. Finally, he looked up at his daughter with an expression of grim determination. "Lily, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You are never to speak of this to anyone outside this family. Not to your friends, not to your teacher, not to anyone in town. Do you understand?" The girl nodded, confused by her father's reaction. "But Papa, we have to tell someone. If something bad happened to that child—" "Daughter," Thomas said quietly, "sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can do is ask questions when powerful people don't want them asked. Mr. Blackwood has friends in very high places, shipping magnates, state politicians, enough money to make problems disappear." Martha Pritchard spoke for the first time since hearing her daughter's story. "What are you saying, Thomas? That we just ignore what Lily saw?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words carefully. "I'm saying we need to be very, very careful about what we do next. Because if Lily is right about what she witnessed, then we're dealing with something far worse than just an orchard with unusual business practices." As if summoned by their conversation, a knock sounded at the front door. Through the frosted window, they could see the imposing silhouette of a man in a dark overcoat, his breath forming clouds in the cold evening air. It was Silas Blackwood himself, come calling on his neighbors with a smile that didn't quite reach those piercing blue eyes. The conversation between Thomas Pritchard and Silas Blackwood that November evening lasted barely 15 minutes, but its implications would echo through the decades that followed. Blackwood had come, he explained, with his characteristic smooth confidence, to discuss a business proposition that would benefit both families. "Thomas," Blackwood began, settling into the Pritchards' modest parlor with the ease of a man accustomed to being welcomed everywhere. "I've been watching your girl, Lily. Sharp eyes, that one. Curious mind. The kind of young lady who notices things others might miss." Thomas felt his wife's hand tighten on his arm, a silent warning to proceed with caution. "Lily's always been observant," Thomas replied carefully, "sometimes too much so for her own good." Blackwood's smile broadened, but his blue eyes remained cold and calculating. "Curiosity is a valuable trait in the right circumstances. In others, it can be problematic. I'm here to ensure that Lily's natural inquisitiveness is channeled in productive directions." From his coat pocket, Blackwood withdrew a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be legal documents. "I'm prepared to offer your family a substantial sum, $700 for a small piece of your land. That strip along the creek where Lily likes to explore. I need it for orchard expansion, water rights, that sort of thing. $700 was more money than the Pritchard family had ever seen at one time. In 1888, it represented nearly 4 years' worth of farm income. The offer was so generous as to be almost suspicious. That's very generous, Mr. Blackwood, Thomas stammered. But that particular piece of land has been in my family for 20 years. It's not really for sale. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the atmosphere of the room. The air seemed to grow heavy, and the oil lamps flickered as if touched by an unfelt breeze. I understand attachment to family land, Thomas. I truly do. But progress waits for no man, and my orchards represent the future of this county. The question is whether your family will be part of that prosperous future or... He let the sentence hang in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Martha Pritchard found her voice. What exactly are you saying, Mr. Blackwood? I'm saying that cooperation tends to be rewarded, while obstruction can lead to unfortunate circumstances. Take the Miller family, for instance. They were initially reluctant to sell me the land where my packing house now stands. But after young Samuel Miller had that terrible accident with his fishing boat, they reconsidered. Amazing how quickly priorities can change when tragedy strikes close to home. The threat was delivered with such casual elegance that it took a moment for its full meaning to register. Samuel Miller had indeed drowned in a fishing accident 6 months earlier, a tragedy that had shocked the community. The idea that it might not have been accidental had never occurred to anyone. Thomas Pritchard looked at his 10-year-old daughter, who sat wide-eyed in the corner, clearly understanding more of the adult conversation than anyone was comfortable with. The choice before him was stark. Accept Blackwood's offer and ensure his family's safety, or refuse and risk the consequences. I'll need some time to consider your offer, Thomas said finally. Blackwood rose from his chair with fluid grace, collecting his portfolio and adjusting his gold watch chain. Of course, take all the time you need. But Thomas, he paused at the door, do remember that opportunities like this don't come along often, and neither do second chances. After Blackwood's departure, the Pritchard family sat in stunned silence. The implications of the visit were clear to all three of them. Lily's observations during the blizzard had somehow reached Blackwood's attention, and the orchard owner was taking steps to ensure that no further questions would be asked. 3 days later, Thomas Pritchard signed the papers selling his creekside property to the Blackwood orchards for $700 in gold coin. The transaction was recorded at the county courthouse with unusual speed, processed by a clerk who had recently received a substantial donation to his church's building fund. But selling the land didn't end Lily's interest in the orchard's operations. If anything, losing her favorite exploring spot only intensified her curiosity about what Blackwood was so desperate to hide. The girl began taking longer routes to school that allowed her to observe the orchards from different angles, noting patterns in the comings and goings of workers and wagons. What she discovered over the following months painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Workers continued to arrive at the orchards in small groups, usually families or individuals who appeared to be itinerant laborers or refugees from the dwindling timber industry. They would be housed in the company bunkhouses for periods ranging from several weeks to a few months. Then, inevitably, they would simply vanish. The disappearances followed a predictable pattern. They always occurred during periods of peak harvest, when the orchards were working around the clock to process the fruit. They always happened at night, usually during the darkest hours before dawn, and they always coincided with the appearance of those mysterious canvas-covered wagons heading inland toward the coastal forest. Lily began keeping a secret journal, recording every observation in a code of her own devising. She noted names when she could learn them, descriptions of the missing workers, dates of their disappearances. By the end of 1889, her journal contained references to 48 individuals who had simply vanished from the orchard's employment. But it was her discovery in late autumn that truly revealed the scope of Blackwood's operation. While exploring the dense woods near the logging trail, Lily found what appeared to be a makeshift burial ground. Dozens of crude graves marked only by numbered wooden stakes driven into the frozen earth. The graves were arranged in neat rows, suggesting systematic organization, rather than random burial of disease victims or unfortunate accidents. Most disturbing of all was the freshness of many graves. The earth was recently turned, the wooden markers still new and unstained by weather. Someone had been burying bodies here regularly, probably for months. Lily counted 112 graves in total. 112 wooden stakes, numbered consecutively, representing 112 human beings who had found their final rest in unmarked graves deep within the Oregon forest. As she stood among the silent markers, a cold coastal rain beginning to fall once again across the landscape, Lily Pritchard realized that she had stumbled upon something far more sinister than unusual business practices. She was looking at evidence of systematic murder, carried out with industrial efficiency, and hidden beneath the respectable facade of agricultural prosperity. The question that would haunt her for the rest of her life was simple. What exactly was Silas Blackwood doing to those workers that required them to be buried in secret graves? And more importantly, how many more would die before someone found the courage to stop him? The winter of 1889 gave way to a spring that brought both renewed hope and escalating horror to Porthaven. News of burgeoning trade routes and increasing demand for Oregon's produce brought a cautious optimism to the isolated town. For Silas Blackwood, these developments meant expanded opportunities and even larger contracts with distributors in Portland and San Francisco. But for Lily Pritchard, now 11 and increasingly haunted by her discoveries, spring brought new evidence of the terrible secret hidden within the orchard's operations. Her clandestine observations had evolved into a systematic investigation, driven by a young girl's unwavering sense of justice and a growing understanding that she might be the only person positioned to expose the truth. The breakthrough came in May, when Lily witnessed the arrival of a new group of workers. Unlike previous groups, this family included someone Lily recognized: Sarah Jenkins, the 14-year-old daughter of a blacksmith from nearby Astoria. Sarah's family had fallen on hard times after a devastating fire destroyed their smithy the previous month, and word had spread through coastal communities that they were seeking employment and shelter. Lily watched as the Jenkins family, parents, 2 daughters, and a young son, were welcomed at the orchard with Blackwood's characteristic charm and efficiency. They were assigned to a small bunkhouse in the workers' quarters, given employment in the fruit packing house, and promised steady wages plus room and board. To outside observers, it appeared to be an ideal arrangement for a family left destitute. But Lily knew better. Based on her observations of previous patterns, she estimated that the Jenkins family had perhaps 2 months before they would join the ranks of the disappeared. The knowledge filled her with a desperate urgency. These weren't anonymous refugees anymore. This was a family she knew, people she had seen during occasional trips to Astoria. Determined to gather concrete evidence of Blackwood's crimes, Lily began taking extraordinary risks. She started sneaking onto the orchard property at night, hiding in empty crates and disused sheds to observe the nighttime activities that seemed to be central to the operation. What she discovered exceeded her worst fears. The orchard's underground root cellar, accessible through a seldom-used entrance near the packing house, contained facilities that had nothing to do with fruit storage. Lily glimpsed rooms that appeared to be designed for confinement, bare chambers with heavy wooden doors and narrow, grate-covered ventilation shafts. She saw what looked like a bizarre medical facility, complete with strange instruments and bottles of liquids, whose purposes she could only guess at. Most disturbing of all was a hidden room that contained detailed records of every worker who had ever been employed at the orchard. Names, ages, physical descriptions, family connections, and most significantly, detailed notes about their usefulness for what Blackwood termed experimental purposes. The files were organized with meticulous care, suggesting a systematic approach to whatever was happening to the missing workers. Lily's blood ran cold as she read entries in Blackwood's own handwriting. Subject 42, John Davies, age 28, excellent physical condition, suitable for endurance testing, expired after 96 hours. Subject 55, Clara Schmidt, age 32, previous exposure to malaria, useful for immunity studies, disposed of after 3 weeks observation. Subject 71, Thomas O'Connell, age 17, strong constitution, ideal for grafting procedures, materials preserved for further study. The clinical language and systematic notation made clear that the orchard was serving as cover for horrifying medical experiments. Blackwood wasn't simply murdering his workers. He was using them as human test subjects for research that violated every principle of medical ethics and human decency. The realization that Sarah Jenkins and her family were destined for this fate drove Lily to desperate action. She began leaving anonymous warnings for the Jenkins family, slipping notes under their bunkhouse door at night or hiding messages where Sarah might find them during her work shifts. The warnings were cryptic. Trust no one at the orchard. Leave while you still can. Danger comes with the harvest moon. but she hoped they would plant seeds of suspicion that might save their lives. Her efforts seemed to be working. Lily noticed that Sarah had become increasingly nervous and watchful. She began asking questions about previous workers, inquiring about families who had supposedly moved on to other opportunities. Her questions made other current workers uncomfortable, and word eventually reached Blackwood that the newest employees were displaying troubling curiosity about orchard operations. The response was swift and ruthless. On the night of July 10, 1890, Lily watched in horror as armed guards surrounded the Jenkins family's bunkhouse. The family was roused from their beds and marched at gunpoint toward the orchard's underground facilities. Sarah's terrified cries echoed across the compound as she was separated from her parents and younger siblings. Lily knew she was witnessing the beginning of the end for the Jenkins family. Within days, they would become subjects in Blackwood's twisted experiments. Within weeks, they would join the 112 unmarked graves deep within the Oregon forest. But Sarah Jenkins was different from previous victims. She was young, intelligent, and determined to survive. As Lily would soon discover, she was also planning something that would either save her family or ensure that their deaths would not go unwitnessed. Just when we thought we'd seen the depths of Silas Blackwood's depravity, a 14-year-old girl's courage would illuminate the full horror of what was happening inside that orchard. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content. And don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what Sarah Jenkins did next. Hidden in the root cellar, Sarah had discovered something that even Lily's investigations had missed. A detailed journal kept by Blackwood himself, documenting every experiment, every death, and most importantly, every financial transaction connected to his research. The orchard wasn't just a cover for medical experiments. It was part of a larger network providing human subjects to wealthy, unethical physicians and researchers throughout the booming West. Men willing to pay enormous sums for opportunities to conduct studies impossible in legitimate medical settings. The journal revealed that Blackwood's operation was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. He had established similar facilities disguised as mining operations in California and timber camps in Washington, all funneling human subjects into his twisted experiments. The network had processed over 600 subjects in 3 years, generating profits that dwarfed even the substantial income from legitimate fruit production. But the journal also contained information that would prove to be Blackwood's downfall. It included names, dates, and locations of transactions with prominent doctors and influential figures in various West Coast cities. It detailed payoffs to local authorities and threats made against potential witnesses. Most damaging of all, it contained correspondence with high-ranking government officials who were purchasing experimental data derived from Blackwood's human subjects for scientific advancement. Sarah managed to tear out several crucial pages from the journal and hide them in her clothing before being discovered by guards. She knew that the evidence she carried might be the only hope of exposing the truth about what was happening at the orchard. But first, she would have to survive long enough to get the information to someone who could act on it. What she didn't know was that Lily Pritchard had been watching from outside a narrow ventilation shaft, and that she had seen her conceal the stolen pages. The two young girls, separated by bars and guards, but united in their determination to stop Blackwood's crimes, were about to form the most unlikely partnership in the history of Porthaven. A partnership that would either save dozens of lives or cost them their own. The final phase of Silas Blackwood's operation began on a sweltering August morning in 1891, when a telegram arrived from the regional government office in Salem. The message was brief but devastating to Blackwood's plans. Effective immediately, all private research facilities were being reviewed by a newly formed state oversight committee, and any operations conducting experimental work on human subjects must be registered and inspected within 30 days. Lily Pritchard, hidden in her usual observation post high in an ancient fir tree overlooking the orchards, watched as Blackwood read the telegram. The orchard owner's face went through a remarkable transformation, from confident authority to barely controlled rage, to cold, calculating determination. Whatever the telegram contained, it had fundamentally changed the situation at the orchards. Within hours, Blackwood had called a meeting of his inner circle. Dr. Elias Thorne, whom Lily now realized was not just the general store owner, but a medical researcher working with Blackwood, Foreman Gideon Croft, and 4 armed guards who served as enforcers. The meeting took place in Blackwood's private office, but Lily had discovered that voices carried clearly through an old, disused drainage pipe that ran from the office to the outside. "Gentlemen," Blackwood's voice was controlled but tense, "we have 30 days to conclude our current research and eliminate all evidence of our activities. The Oversight Committee includes several individuals who would not be sympathetic to our work, regardless of its scientific value." Dr. Thorne's response was immediate and panicked. 30 days, Silas? We have 63 active subjects in various stages of study. Some experiments have been running for months. We can't simply. We can and we will. Blackwood cut him off. Every subject currently in the facility will be processed to completion within the next 2 weeks. All records will be destroyed. All physical evidence will be eliminated. By the time any inspectors arrive, they will find nothing more than a prosperous orchard contributing to Oregon's economy. Lily's blood chilled as she grasped the implications. 63 people were being held in the orchard's underground facilities, and Blackwood was planning to murder them all within 2 weeks to cover up his crimes. Among those 63 were Sarah Jenkins and her family. But even more horrifying was what came next in the conversation. What about witnesses? This was Gideon Croft, the foreman whose job was handling the practical aspects of the operation. The Pritchard girl has been sniffing around for over 2 years. Doc Reed in town mentioned she's never treated any orchard injuries despite all the heavy machinery. And Old Man Thorne's been asking questions about the mail for workers who supposedly moved on. "I'm aware of the potential problems," Blackwood replied smoothly. "I've already taken steps to address the most significant threats. The Pritchard family will be invited to join our workforce within the next few days. A generous offer of employment that they won't be able to refuse. As for the others, well, accidents happen during harvest season. Logging mishaps, hunting accidents, falls from cliffs. Tragic, but understandable." Lily realized with crystal clarity that her entire family was now marked for death. Blackwood had tolerated their knowledge as long as it could be managed through bribes and threats, but with the state investigation looming, all potential witnesses had become liabilities to be eliminated. The girl's mind raced as she considered her options. She could run home and warn her parents, but where would they go? Blackwood had connections throughout Oregon, and fleeing would only confirm their guilt in his eyes. She could try to contact state authorities, but the nearest government office was in Salem, a day's journey away, and she had no proof that anyone would believe her. The only chance was to coordinate with Sarah Jenkins and the other prisoners to expose the truth before Blackwood could implement his final solution. But that would require getting into the underground facilities past armed guards and organizing a coordinated escape attempt with people who had been weakened by weeks or months of captivity. Lily made her decision. That night, she would attempt the most dangerous infiltration of her young life, seeking to reach the underground prisoners and organize a rebellion that would either free them all or ensure that someone survived to tell the truth about what had happened at the Blackwood orchards. As she prepared to descend from her hiding place, Lily overheard one final exchange that made her mission even more urgent. "When do we begin the final processing?" Dr. Thorne asked. "Tonight," Blackwood replied. "We'll start with the children. They require less preparation, and their elimination will encourage cooperation from the adult subjects. By morning, we should be able to reduce our numbers by at least a dozen." Lily's hands shook as she climbed down from the fir tree. Sarah's younger brother would be among the first to die unless something was done immediately. The girl who had spent over 2 years observing and recording Blackwood's crimes was about to discover whether her courage was equal to the task of stopping them. The underground root cellar of the Blackwood orchards after midnight was a place that existed beyond nightmares. As Lily crept through corridors lit only by flickering oil lamps, she encountered sights that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Cells containing gaunt figures who barely looked human anymore. Operating rooms stained with evidence of procedures that violated every principle of medical ethics. Storage areas filled with jars containing specimens that had once been parts of living people. But it was in the final corridor that Lily found what she was looking for. Sarah Jenkins, still alive, still defiant, and still clutching the stolen journal pages that could expose Blackwood's entire operation. When she saw Lily's face at her cell window, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperate determination. "Lily," she whispered, "thank God. I thought no one knew we were here." "I know everything," Lily replied softly. "And I'm going to get you out, but we have to move fast. They're planning to kill all of you tonight, starting with the children." Sarah's face hardened with resolve. "Then we don't have time for a careful escape. We're going to have to fight our way out, and some of us probably won't make it. As Lily worked to pick the lock on Sarah's cell with tools stolen from the orchard's maintenance shed, both young people understood that they were embarking on a mission that would either save dozens of lives or cost them their own. But they also knew that they were the only hope for justice for the 112 people already buried in unmarked graves in the Oregon forest. The rebellion was about to begin. The uprising at the Blackwood Orchards began at 3:12 a.m. on August 20th, 1891, when Lily Pritchard and Sarah Jenkins unlocked the first cell door and whispered the words that would change everything. "We're getting out of here. All of us. Tonight." The prisoners they freed were in various stages of physical and mental deterioration. But Sarah's stolen journal pages had revealed something that transformed their despair into fury. Blackwood's records showed that none of them were random victims. They had been specifically selected based on detailed profiles. Families with no local connections, individuals fleeing hardship who wouldn't be missed, people whose disappearances could be explained away as voluntary departures. But more importantly, the records revealed that several prisoners had family members in positions of authority. Sarah's uncle was a respected judge in Portland. Another prisoner's brother was a wealthy timber magnate. A third victim's father was a prominent senator from California. Blackwood had been playing a dangerous game, and his systematic documentation of every detail would provide the evidence needed to destroy him. The escape plan was desperate but simple. Sarah would lead a group through the root cellar toward a seldom-used ventilation shaft that emerged near the coastal cliffs, while Lily created a diversion at the main packing house to draw away the guards. The freed prisoners would make their way to the county seat, where Sarah's stolen documents could be presented to state authorities. What none of them anticipated was the presence of Dr. Elias Thorne in the root cellar at that exact moment, conducting what he called preliminary preparations on the youngest prisoners. The physician's scream of alarm echoed through the corridors as he stumbled upon Lily freeing the last group of captives. "Guards! Guards! The subjects are escaping." The root cellar erupted into chaos. Armed men thundered down the stairs while prisoners scattered in every direction through the maze of corridors. Lily found herself separated from Sarah as gunshots rang out in the narrow spaces, the sound deafening in the confined underground chambers. But Sarah Jenkins had not survived weeks of captivity, only to be recaptured at the moment of freedom. Clutching Blackwood's incriminating journal pages, she led her group of freed prisoners through a route she had memorized during her imprisonment, past the surgical rooms, through the specimen storage areas, toward what she hoped was the ventilation shaft Lily had described. Behind them, they could hear Blackwood's voice, cold and commanding, even in crisis. "Seal the exits. No one leaves this facility alive. Dr. Thorne, begin immediate termination of all remaining subjects. We cannot afford witnesses." The race through the root cellar became a nightmarish game of life and death. Prisoners who had been weakened by weeks of horrifying experiments now found reserves of strength they didn't know they possessed. Mothers carried children who could barely walk. Men who had been subjected to horrific procedures helped others navigate corridors slick with spillage from overturned chemical containers. Lily, separated from the main group, found herself face to face with Gideon Croft in a storage room filled with the orchard's most damning evidence. Shelves lined with jars containing preserved organs, detailed sketches of surgical procedures, and boxes of correspondence with physicians throughout the West who had purchased Blackwood's research data. "You should have minded your own business, girl," Croft snarled, raising his rifle. But Lily had spent over 2 years preparing for this moment. From her hiding place behind a stack of empty crates, she threw a glass jar of highly flammable lamp oil directly at the flickering oil lamp illuminating the room. The glass shattered, the lamp fell, and suddenly the storage area was engulfed in flames that spread with terrifying speed through the chemical-soaked environment. The fire created the diversion Lily had hoped for, but it also transformed the escape into a desperate race against time. The root cellar, filled with flammable chemicals and wooden support structures, became an inferno that threatened to trap everyone inside, prisoners and captors alike. Sarah's group reached the ventilation shaft just as smoke began pouring through the root cellar corridors, but their escape route was blocked by 2 guards who had anticipated their destination. With the fire spreading behind them and armed men ahead, the situation seemed hopeless. It was 6-year-old Thomas Jenkins, Sarah's little brother, who provided the solution. The boy had noticed something the adults had missed: a narrow, disused culvert that connected the root cellar to the coastal cliff face, probably installed during the orchard's early construction for overflow drainage. The culvert was narrow, partially filled with brackish water, and designed for drainage rather than human passage, but it offered their only hope of escape. One by one, the prisoners crawled through the culvert as smoke and flames spread through the root cellar behind them. Sarah went last, clutching the stolen journal pages in a waterproof pouch she had improvised from oiled cloth found in the storage areas. They emerged from the culvert into the pre-dawn darkness along the rocky cliff face, gasping and choking, but alive. Behind them, the Blackwood orchards, particularly the packing house and root cellar, were becoming a pillar of fire, visible for miles across the Oregon coast. The flames had spread from the root cellar to the main structures, consuming not just the buildings, but all the evidence of Blackwood's crimes. Or so it seemed. Lily Pritchard emerged from the burning building 15 minutes later, having fought her way through smoke-filled corridors to reach safety. But she wasn't empty-handed. Tucked inside her worn jacket were two items that would prove crucial. Blackwood's personal financial ledger, which contained financial records of the entire operation, and a metal strongbox containing correspondence with influential state and federal officials who had been purchasing experimental data. As the survivors gathered along the cliff face, watching the orchard burn against the morning sky, they realized they had not just escaped. They had struck a devastating blow against Blackwood's operation. The fire had destroyed the facilities, freed the remaining prisoners, and eliminated the infrastructure that had made the systematic murders possible. But Silas Blackwood himself was nowhere to be seen. As sirens and shouts echoed across the countryside, as neighbors rushed toward the burning orchards and state authorities were summoned from Salem, the man responsible for 112 murders had simply vanished into the chaos of the night. The question that would haunt investigators for decades was simple. Where had he gone? And would he attempt to rebuild his operation elsewhere? The answer would not come for 35 years, when construction workers breaking ground for a new lighthouse on a remote coastal island would make a discovery that revealed the final chapter of Silas Blackwood's story. The immediate aftermath of the orchard fire brought justice with surprising swiftness. Sarah Jenkins' stolen journal pages, combined with Lily Pritchard's rescued ledger and the testimony of 41 freed prisoners, provided overwhelming evidence of the systematic murders that had taken place beneath the respectable facade of fruit production. State investigators arrived from Salem within 72 hours, led by Detective Inspector Arthur Vance, whose own cousin had been among Blackwood's victims. The scope of the operation shocked even experienced law enforcement officials. Dr. Elias Thorne, captured while attempting to flee the burning facility, provided detailed testimony in exchange for avoiding execution. His revelations expanded the investigation beyond Oregon to include similar research facilities, disguised as mining camps in Nevada and logging operations in Idaho. The financial records Lily had saved proved that Blackwood's network had generated over $3 million in profit from the sale of experimental data and preserved specimens to physicians throughout the West. Prominent doctors in San Francisco, Seattle, and Denver were arrested on charges ranging from conspiracy to murder to violation of medical ethics. Several high-ranking state and federal officials were implicated and forced to resign after being court-martialed for purchasing research derived from human experimentation. But Silas Blackwood himself remained a ghost. Despite extensive searches and substantial rewards offered for information leading to his capture, the orchard owner had vanished completely. Some believed he had fled to Europe, where his wealth could purchase safety and anonymity. Others suspected he had assumed a new identity somewhere in the burgeoning West, perhaps establishing another operation under a different name. The 112 unmarked graves along the logging trail were exhumed, and the victims were given proper burial in the Porthaven City Cemetery. A monument was erected bearing their names, recovered from Blackwood's meticulous records, along with the inscription, "In memory of those who died in the pursuit of evil disguised as progress. May their suffering never be forgotten." Lily Pritchard became something of a local legend, though she never seemed comfortable with the attention. She testified at numerous trials, helping to convict not just the direct participants in Blackwood's operation, but also the suppliers, customers, and officials who had enabled the crimes. Her detailed observations and careful record-keeping proved crucial in establishing the full scope of the conspiracy. Rebecca Sutton recovered from her ordeal and became a vocal advocate for medical ethics and patient rights. She testified before Congress about the need for oversight of medical research, contributing to legislation that established federal guidelines for human experimentation. Her courage in stealing and preserving Blackwood's journal pages was credited with saving dozens of lives and exposing a criminal network that spanned multiple states. For 35 years, it seemed that Silas Blackwood had successfully escaped justice. The investigation gradually wound down. Other priorities claimed official attention, and the Orchard fire became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unregulated scientific research during a period of rapid expansion. Then, in 1926, construction workers breaking ground for a new lighthouse on a remote, uninhabited coastal island off the Oregon coast made a discovery that provided the final piece of the puzzle. Buried beneath what had once been a small, abandoned shack, they found a hidden chamber containing the preserved body of a man in his late 60s, dressed in expensive, mildewed clothing and surrounded by gold coins, legal documents, and personal effects that identified him as Silas Blackwood. The condition of the body and the arrangement of the chamber suggested that Blackwood had not died in the Orchard fire, but had been murdered shortly before it began. Medical examination revealed that he had been killed by a single gunshot to the head, fired at close range by someone he trusted enough to turn his back on. Among the documents found with the body was a letter in Blackwood's handwriting, apparently written in his final moments. To whoever discovers this record, I have been betrayed by those who profited most from my work. Dr. Thorne and Governor Davies have decided that my knowledge makes me a liability now that state investigation threatens our operation. They believe that my death will end the inquiry and protect their own involvement. They are wrong. The evidence I have hidden will ensure that justice follows them wherever they flee. Let this be a warning to all who would trade human life for profit. The dead have longer memories than the living. The letter led to the arrest of Dr. Elias Thorne, who had been living quietly in a remote logging town under an assumed name, and the disgraced former Governor Robert Davies, who had fled to Mexico after his resignation. Both men were tried and executed for their roles in the conspiracy, finally bringing the case to complete closure. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the Blackwood Orchards investigation was its impact on American medical ethics. The systematic horrors revealed by Lily's investigation and Sarah's courage contributed to the establishment of formal oversight bodies for medical research, legal protections for human subjects, and international conventions governing medical experimentation. The orchard site itself was never rebuilt. The land was purchased by the state of Oregon and converted into a nature preserve, where visitors can hike among the trees that now grow wild where fruit trees once concealed chambers of horror. A plaque near the old logging trail marks the spot where Lily Pritchard first observed the mysterious nighttime wagons that led to the exposure of one of the darkest chapters in American history. Lily Pritchard lived to be 89 years old, spending her final decades as a respected conservationist and advocate for marginalized communities. She never married, claiming that her experiences at the orchard had shown her too much about human nature's capacity for evil. But those who knew her described a woman of unshakable moral courage, whose youthful confrontation with systematic evil had forged a character dedicated to ensuring that such horrors could never again hide behind facades of respectability and progress. Sarah Jenkins married a fellow survivor of Blackwood's experiments and raised 4 children, who all became nurses, teachers, or advocates for social justice. She often said that her weeks of captivity had taught her that the most important human quality was not intelligence or strength, but the willingness to act when action was needed, regardless of personal cost. The story of the Blackwood Orchards reminds us that evil often wears respectable faces and hides behind noble purposes. But it also demonstrates that courage, even in the young and powerless, can expose the truth and demand justice for those who have no voice to speak for themselves. This mystery shows us that the most dangerous criminals are often those who convince society that their crimes serve a greater good. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or might there be other operations like Blackwood's that remain hidden even today? Leave your comment below, and let us know what you think. If you enjoyed this tale of courage overcoming institutional evil, and want more historical horror stories like this, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries that make you question what really happened in America's past. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another dark corner of American history that authorities tried to keep buried.